Right. So I just want to be clear that we're only recording our panelists here. Those of you who are attending are not being recorded. But let's start off and just say welcome. I'm very excited to be here with all of you. I'm Emma Howitt. I'm the clinical director for Shalom Austin Jewish Family Service, JFS. And I'm really excited and honored to kick off National Recovery Month tonight with this wonderful panel of Jewish individuals sharing their lived experience with recovery. Our goal tonight is to bring awareness and to reduce stigma related to addiction and recovery, especially in the Jewish community. And addiction and recovery, as we know, affect every community. So we hope that we can bring hope and opportunities for support to the forefront throughout the conversation we have tonight. So I will start off by introducing our panelists, and then I'll begin the panel with some prepared questions. And then if you have any questions during the program, the participants can use the Q&A feature, and you're welcome to send me questions in the chat as well, and we'll make time, as much time as we can at the end to cover those. So let me introduce our wonderful panelists in alphabetical order. Kristin Booth is a seasoned yoga and meditation instructor with a decade of experience guiding folks of all ages in the practice. Her classes are trauma-informed and rooted in her passion is using ritual and spiritual practices as tools to access one's voice, healing, and as a means to change our world for the better. As a person in recovery herself, Kristin found deep healing from Y12SR yoga for 12-step recovery and became a trained leader in 2020. She leads regular meetings in person and virtually, combining the somatic approach of yoga and the cognitive approach of 12-step programs to help heal those who experience addiction and those who love them. When not leading classes, Kristin can be found spending time outside with her husband of 10 years, Matt, and their young toddler, Juniper. Welcome, Kristin. All right, next we have Brandon Poland. Brandon is a person in long-term recovery with over 20 years sober. After finishing college, Brandon focused on his career of being of service to his community, first in the public sector, working for the state of Texas for several years, and now in behavioral health. 4 years ago, Brandon moved to Dallas and knows that no matter where he lives, the Austin recovery community and the Austin Jewish community, and especially Temple Beth Shalom, will always be part of him. Welcome, Brandon. Next, we have Constance Scharff, PhD. Howitt is an internationally recognized speaker and author on the topics of addiction recovery and mental health. She currently serves Rock to Recovery, a music-based addiction and trauma treatment program, as VP Business Development. Previously, Dr. Scharff was Senior Addiction Research Fellow and Director of Addiction Research for a luxury addiction treatment center based in Malibu, California. She is the 2019 recipient of St. Lawrence University's Sol Feinstein Humanitarian Award, honoring her service to and advocacy for those suffering from mental illness, trauma, and addiction. Dr. Scharff's writing centers around using complementary health and contemplative practices to improve treatment outcomes. Her latest book, Rock to Recovery, Music as a Catalyst for Human Transformation, written with Rock to Recovery founder Wes Geer, describes the impact songwriting and performance has on mental health. She is also co-author of the Amazon #1 best-selling book, Ending Addiction for Good, and the award-winning poetry book, Meeting God at Midnight. Dr. Scharff regularly travels the world speaking, teaching, and advocating for compassionate health practices that destigmatize mental health problems. Ahuva has been sober for more than 20 years. Welcome, Ahuva. All right, and Sheldon Weinstein. Sheldon Weinstein, licensed clinical social worker, is a person in recovery who was raised as a Jewish man in strict conservative Judaism and has been affiliated with synagogue most of his adult life. Sheldon retired after 30 years as a psychiatric social worker. Most of that time, his work was with mental health and addiction patients. He became seriously involved with drugs and alcohol in his 20s and 30s and became addicted. Sheldon got sober at age 34 and has been abstinent from all alcohol and drugs since then. Welcome, Sheldon. All right, thank you all so much. Such a wonderful panel. So I kind of want to just dive in. I would love to hear from each of you what you have experienced as some common misconceptions about recovery, and a little bit about what recovery means for you personally, professionally, however you would like to speak about that experience for yourself. So I would love to ask Brandon to start us off.
All right, well, common misconceptions about recovery. I have a very dear friend of mine who is Jewish, and when she shares her story from the podium, she talks about calling her father and telling her father that she had a problem and she needed help. And her father said, "Jews are not alcoholics. Jews sell shoes." And he meant that, you know, and he is sorely mistaken. Other misconceptions about recovery, specifically in my experience in recovery is in 12-step recovery, is that the meetings are all Christian and the meetings are all closed with the Lord's Prayer, and that require, we have to say it. And I got sober in Austin. That's not necessarily the case there. Many of the meetings here in Dallas do close with the Lord's Prayer. It's not a prayer I choose to say in a meeting. I close my eyes and I say the Shema, and that's something that, my rabbi and I discussed, in Austin many years ago. What can I do instead of the Lord's Prayer if it's being prayed? So there's that. And I believe the other question was related to, I'm sorry, my recovery?
Not a problem. Yeah, what does recovery mean for you personally and professionally?
So personally and professionally, I think they're kind of on a pretty similar path in terms of definition. For me today, recovery is a change in behavior and a change in thinking, right? So there is, like the psychoeducational piece, and then there is the therapeutic piece, right? So what that looks like for me today is continued work within a 12-step program with, a sponsor or spiritual advisor, and working with others in that respect. And so staying active in my own recovery and in the recovery of others, one. And another way that I do that, in addition to step work, is through therapy. For the longest time, I was scared of therapy, and I just think of, the years wasted with that, and so I'm so glad that Ahuva is here because, she can talk about the effect that trauma has on addicts and alcoholics. And my experience is that when addicts and alcoholics don't look at their trauma and don't work on their trauma, they relapse. And, I have a disease, we have a disease that when people relapse, they don't always make it back, So I think that's enough for me right now.
Beautiful, thank you. All right, Kristin, I would love to hear from you about some common misconceptions that you've experienced or heard about recovery, and then what recovery means for you.
Thank you. I can really talk about my own hangups with it because before addressing my addiction, I had my own judgments around what it meant. And, I thought for so long that I didn't have a problem. I just had a thing with my addiction. That's kind of how my self-talk was. And I got what I can now see really, really good at hiding in plain sight. And so I associated 12-step and any type of therapy and addressing things like that as for other people, for people who are weak, not realizing that I was lying to myself about what really was going on. And so much of my own addictive behaviors is rooted in shame. And so I never knew that until I happened to wander into a therapy session, and the really astute therapist was just like, wait a second, let's talk about this. And lo and behold, here we are. So it's kind of at this point for me, really, the more that I talk about my addictive behaviors and the more that I keep coming back, the more that shame comes down a little bit more and a little bit more each and every time. And so I appreciate this discussion, because I think just talking more openly and realizing that this is, as Brandon said, a disease, and, a lot of people are affected by it. And, I think that's what I'm coming to continue to learn myself about all of this and about my own recovery, and, hearing about other people's experiences, because it affects all of us differently. For myself, for a while, I was just in a 12-step program, and I, got pretty cocky and thought like, okay, cool. I got that down, did the 12 steps. I love a list, check, check, check. And because I've always, not always, but a good majority of my adult life, I've practiced yoga, I leaned into the yoga, let go of the 12 step, realized that didn't work either, because like your girl is here again, really good at hiding in plain sight, and, thought that, the yoga practice, and then realized for me, the miracle really happened with both. My recovery for me really is addressing that addictive behavior, because it really disconnects me from myself. It disconnects me from other people. It disconnects me from my environment. And so, yoga means union. It means integration, finding balance. And so finding yoga for 12-step recovery was a holistic model to address really the physical, mental, and spiritual. Like Brandon said, like there's, circling all the different wagons and addressing my addiction from all angles. To be clear, it's not, yoga for 12-step recovery is not a replacement for 12-step. It's just an outside tool. And so now, when people talk about like self-care, for me, self-care is really being the parent that I need to be for myself, and really making sure that I'm looking at recovery from all of these different angles, because it's not just physical, it's not just mental, and it's not just spiritual. It's all of those things is how I've experienced it. And I need to kind of spin all of those plates to really make sure that my recovery is long-term and always front of mind. And so I hope I answered your question. I feel like I kind of went on a little tangent, but that's what it means to me. And I really appreciate the discussion. It's a really great panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristin. Appreciate your answer. That was, I think, very enlightening. Right, so Sheldon, I would love to hear from you what some common misconceptions are about recovery and what it means for you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to be here with everybody this evening. I wanted to take a minute before we talked about common misconceptions about recovery and talk about what goes on for Jews in active addiction, if I can. in a lot of addiction recovery, there is most definitely more stigma against women than there are against men. You know, men go out and have a rough night and drink and get in trouble. It's boys will be boys. But if women do it, then they become lushes and barflies and other pejorative names. The same thing happens for Jews, because one of the worst things you can be as a Jew is to end up being a shikker, which is a Yiddish word meaning drunk. And most definitely you don't end up knife fighting in bars. Good Jewish boys don't do that. And you don't get locked up multiple times for breaking the law. Good Jewish boys don't do that. You don't get divorced multiple times. Good Jewish boys are not supposed to be doing that. So there's a lot of that. And the greatest tragedy, because after I got sober, I spent 30 years in the addiction treatment field, mostly in inpatient with and you know, the greatest tragedy is how many Jews die of addiction because no one will talk about it. I mean, literally end up in the coffin, in the ground, because they won't talk about it, their families won't acknowledge it, it's not that bad. And my own personal experience is that there is a large number of people who are really just dying out there for that reason. Coming to recovery, I think I was like a lot of people when I got desperate and asked for help, quit drinking and drugging. I was still denying and prevaricating and defending and reacting. And so I latched onto the Jew label quick. Hey, this isn't for me, I'm Jewish, what are you guys doing? And you know, there's all this sort of Christian looking stuff going on in the meetings. Obviously, I'm in the wrong place. I'm personally very lucky that didn't drive me out. I was able to stay. I think one of the biggest misconceptions in recovery clearly is once I quit drinking and drugging, I'll be fine. Not true for most everybody I know. And another misconception is the idea that what we learn in recovery is how to use willpower to stay away from the drugs and alcohol. What other great misconceptions are there? Probably more, but none come to mind this minute. The takeaway for me is, let me go back and say that my upbringing was in that brand of conservative Judaism that leaned heavily towards orthodoxy. So I went to Hebrew school 2 nights a week. I went to shul every Shabbos, you know, celebrated all the holidays, was bar mitzvah, was studied with the rabbi after that, all that. And, you know, all of that, I missed the boat completely about what that was really about. And it wasn't until I got into recovery that I understood that it was important for me to become and develop myself as a spiritual being. And that's what, in fact, the 12-step recovery programs have led me into, is to become a spiritual person and all that means. Let me say can I plug a book? It's not mine. This is a book, it's called Living Each Day, written by a rabbi called Abraham Twersky, good old Abe. Oh, I'm glad people are shaking their heads. So Abe Twersky was an Orthodox rabbi of quite a lot of renown in the I think it was Philadelphia. I can't remember Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. He also was a psychiatrist. He also opened one of the first treatment centers in the US called Gateway House. And in this book, it's a book of daily reading. So there's one for every day of the year. And every day he takes Torah, I'm trying to get the glare off, Torah portions and translate them into 12-step language. It is without a doubt been a mainstay of my program And I haven't had a drink in 42 years. And I haven't read it all that long, so I didn't know about it. I think that in recovery, a lot of times there are challenges for Jews. There are a lot of programs, a lot of meetings, the 12-step that end with the Lord's Prayer. In Atlanta, there's an all Jews meeting that ends with the Shema, which was really nice. I went there a couple of times when I was visiting family. But, I think that ultimately there is no conflict between what happens in the 12-step programs and the Jewish religion and Jewish liturgy and all of that stuff. 'Cause I've spent quite a time trying to reconcile that and talking with rabbis about that. I'm very comfortable with today that there is no conflict. And the idea of becoming a better person is clearly the whole end that the Torah is leading us to. So I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you so much, Sheldon. That was wonderful. I appreciate you sharing the Abraham Tversky. He's a great resource. All right, Ahuva, I would love to hear from you some common misconceptions and what recovery means for you.
Yeah, so I'm very much in line with Brandon's comment, and thank you for asking me to be here. I'm very much in line with Brandon's comment that Jews aren't drunks. In fact, in the literature, if you look in the literature and up through the 80s, it was really in the 80s when people were like, oh, actually, Jews might drink a little bit. I was very fortunate to get sober on the west side of Los Angeles before this was, 10 years. I moved to Austin when I had 12 years of sobriety. So it was, first 10 years of my sobriety, I was in the west side of Los Angeles, and it was all Jewish. I mean, the meetings were, you can't find a Jew in a West Side meeting on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, but every Jewish person I know is there on Christmas Day because somebody might need help, and that's where I grew up. And so I quote unquote grew up in sobriety. And so my perception is that the big book tells the truth. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells the truth that we get to choose our own understanding of a higher power. First of all, I was struck sober. I have so much trauma in my background. At first, I could not get the program. I could not stay sober. I would try to stay sober and the trauma would come up and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do both at the same time. And I really needed a lot of outside support. And I heard a colleague of mine recently say that most research is me search, right? So I got into the field of complementary therapies for addiction and trauma treatment because I could try them all out on myself. And so I needed a lot of that outside support, not just, a 12-step program for my recovery. And I have been very lucky, first of all, to be supported by, none of my sponsors have been Jewish, but to be supported by people who are like, go to your rabbis, go to your outside resources. I love Tversky's work. It's incredibly supportive of recovery. And, I really actually during the pandemic, I got a new sponsor and he was like, you don't have a good conception of a higher power. And I was like, well, it's because this damn Christian program. And he's like, it's not a Christian program, and he said, what is your conception of a higher power? And it turns out I do have a very good conception of a higher power. And it comes from the Zohar, right? It comes from, Kabbalah. It comes from from Jewish mysticism. And it's absolutely in line with 12-step work. So, the fact that Jews say, oh, 12 steps aren't for me, it's too Christian, Jews aren't drunks, whatever. That's to me, the big misconception. And, as Sheldon said, we die over it. We die over it in numbers that are astonishing because, Jews just aren't like that. And we don't want to embarrass anything. So, we'll lock that away, and so that to me, is a real shame. And I think, for my own recovery, I've been very fortunate to, my work and my recovery go together. And in those, dark moments where it's like, oh yeah, drink sounds good, which doesn't solve a thing, after all these years, I mean, you've got almost 100 years of sobriety in your panel, with just 4 of us. I think, oh, you want to throw away your career too? You want to throw away all your relationships too? You want to throw everything? You know, it was like, you know, and here's the strange mental defect: for a moment of not having to feel. That's what I want. I want that oblivion. I want a moment of not having to feel. And what I pay for that with, the price of that, is my whole life goes down in flames. I was 22 years old and dying of alcoholism. My liver and kidneys were giving out. And I shouldn't have lived past 25. I really shouldn't have, you know, and I was able to get sober, and now I get to travel the world and give back and be with Jews, and it's almost high holidays. And, you know, people are like, oh, are you going to the shul? If you're not going to the shul, are you going to go Zoom at my house? Are you going to go Zoom at my house? You know, where are you going to break the fast? All the things, all those things happen because of my recovery. And that is a blessing. I couldn't reach a hand back to help other people if someone hadn't reached a hand back for me.
Beautifully said. I love that we have that 100 years. That's beautiful also. Such a powerful thing. So you may have kind of answered this, Ahuva, but can you describe what motivated you to personally make a change, and really what you ended up doing, how you asked for help?
Yeah, so I didn't ask for help, and it nearly killed me. I was drinking very heavily. My father died very suddenly of a heart attack. And when he died, I realized, oh, he isn't the problem. I'm an alcoholic. It just came to, I just got it. It just came to me. I thought that I drank because I was afraid of him. And I was like, well, he's dead, so there's nothing to be afraid of. And my drinking actually picked up. It got worse. And someone said to me, you know, you should stop or you're going to die. And I knew that that was the truth. I went to a 12-step program, and November 11th of 1995. And my current sobriety date is June 29th, 1998. So there was, you know, 2.5, almost 3 years in there. And the trauma just was so bad that I couldn't get it. And I relapsed and I left the 12 steps because I thought it just doesn't work, even though the book says very clearly, get outside help for outside issues. We'll help you get sober, and that's what we do. And the other things, you need other support. But there wasn't really good treatment at this, you know, this is the 90s. There wasn't good treatment at the time. And a man who was not Jewish, he was actually a jazz musician from New Orleans, who I had known in the program. He was also a novelist, and he encouraged me as a writer. He called me up and he said, I have a very aggressive form of liver cancer. I will not live long, and I want to see you before I die. And I spent the last 102 days of his life with him, just going to his house every day, you know, being of service any way that I could. And I asked him what he wanted, and he said, I want to see you get 100 days sober. And like I said, he died when I had about 102 days. And it was Friday night, which was our home group meeting, and when he died. And on the way to the home group meeting, I just felt I knew he had died. I just, in my heart, I knew he had died. And I just felt his presence in my car, and I haven't had to have a drink since then. And what that has given me, I literally was struck sober, but what that has given me is an opportunity to do the work on trauma, because, you know, I'm a PhD and this is my field of study, and more than just over 50% of addicts and alcoholics have a co-occurring psychological or psychiatric disorder. And most of them have some form, even if it's not diagnosable, you know, adverse childhood experiences, what we call ACEs, or trauma, diagnosable trauma. And so, you know, how do we, and my view is that addiction, substance use, is a way to cope with that. And that was certainly my experience. So I look at what are the complementary therapies that we can add to someone's recovery process, right? Because, you know, as you know, has been alluded to here, recovery is really a spiritual experience about a spiritual connection. I don't really prefer the disease model. I love the word dis-ease, right? With a hyphen in between. That if I can make a spiritual connection that I can recover. And so the thing that has given me meaning, right? Because Viktor Frankl talks about man's search for meaning, and that, you know, our lives and our recovery have, you know, purpose when we have meaning. It really is reaching back and helping someone else. It is knowing that after years of study and heartache and recovery and fighting for, you know, every good minute that I get to have, that I can say, oh, by the way, guys, these are the things that work. This is what has helped me. There are things that have helped other people that didn't help me, and we don't know why that is. You know, we're still learning that information in the research, but you know, to help other people, because I'm sick of burying them. You know, I'm sick of burying them. And when you're in this field, it is funerals all the time. I work with an organization, Rock to Recovery. You know, we work with about 30,000 people a year. Okay, we work with a lot of folks. Writing and recording songs in addiction treatment and mental health facilities. And every single week we hear, oh, did you hear? And as soon as we hear those words, we know overdosed, died, killed themselves, didn't make it. And we work with a lot of young people. We work with a lot of young people. And, you know, I get their families call me all the time. And I'm sick of it. And so whatever I can do, you know, someone who saves, you know, one life saves the whole world, right? And you know, if not me, then who, right? If not now, then when, right? And so, yeah, I just want to reach back and pull someone out, you know. That's it.
Thank you. So I would love to hear from Kristin. What motivated you personally to make that change, and how did you get help?
Thank you. I like I said before, I was told, I was informed of my addiction, and like I said, I wandered into a therapy session mostly to prove someone else wrong. I know, like, it is not a glamorous reason why I was there. And I happened to make an offhanded comment about this thing I have with my addiction. And the therapist, bless her heart, just had a record scratch. What? Can we go back real quick? And yeah, so that kind of snowballed into, you know, coming to terms with it. And at first, you know, I was just like, okay, she's being dramatic. Like, I'm fine. And then slowly kind of peeling the onion through and with her guidance to realize that, oh no, there's something here and it's not cute. And I, you know, for me, you know, I just also want to address, like, for anyone here, that there's lots of different types of addiction, and, you know, basically all going back to some type of codependency in a way to establish self-regulation. And that might be through alcohol or drugs or, you know, sex and relationships, or even, you know, food. And a lot of those things, as mentioned here, are very integral to Jewish life. I mean, every holiday, either we're fasting or feasting. And, you know, for someone that might have food issues, like, that is like a whole thing. And so I just want to make sure that everyone feels seen, that, you know, there's lots of ways that we, you know, as Ahuva said, you know, find ways to cope with our trauma and our personal situations. And the I'll be fine is really minimizing what we're experiencing. And it doesn't matter if you have big T trauma, one major event, or little T trauma, a lot of micro things. You know, it's really, recovery is really about building that resiliency and that greater sense of self-regulation, and feeling safe and at home in our own bodies, which is really challenging. And it's really hard. And for me, I'm very inspired by the people on this panel. Excuse me. I do not have a very long history of recovery. She's new. And I can really identify with the fact that, you know, there are days and weeks where it's very easy to be rooted in your recovery. And then there are days when you feel like you're drowning and you're white knuckling just to get through the next hour. You know, I gotta be honest with y'all, like, even just knowing that I was coming and sitting on this panel, like, whew, that is vulnerability. And I am not used to that. I do not like that. I mean, I was always called Blackheart growing up because she couldn't crack. And it's because I was secretly coping, you know, and people couldn't see that. And so now as an adult, getting used to being seen and realizing that it could help someone else is very motivating for me. But really, like I said before, each time I put myself in a situation where I am talking about my shit, as unpretty and really messy as it is, it's really helping take away my own shame. And that keeps me moving forward. Also, to be perfectly honest, I have a toddler at home and I want her to have brand new shit, not shit that I passed down to her. Like, I know I'm not going to be a perfect parent, but I know holding on and was given the burden of a lot of generation of people that didn't have resources and that didn't understand, and that didn't have what I have. And so if I can address my own stuff, my girl will hopefully have a whole new set of stuff that she can, you know, cope with and hopefully give her tools. So I think, like Ahuva said, it's motivating to get yourself to a place where you can ask for help and support so you can be there for someone else. It's very healing and scary and terrifying but yeah, that's kind of what brings me here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kristin. And we so appreciate the vulnerability that you share with us tonight, and you wear it beautifully. Thank you. So Brandon, I would love to hear your experience of seeking out change and help.
So I got sober when I was 20 years old. My sobriety date is January the 9th, 1999, and that is not what I had planned. When I was about 15 years old, I told my mother and father that Janis Joplin was my hero. And my mother and father said, you need to find another hero. It did not end well for her. But truly, it was just, that, anyone from, the 60s and Beat generation before, it was just like, that was who I wanted to be. That's who I wanted to emulate, And so I did everything I could to do that, right? And my goal was to, die by the time I was 27. So what happened for me is that my best friend in the whole world got into some legal trouble. And this is in Williamson County, Texas. And she had to go to treatment for a while. And while she was in treatment, she was writing me all these letters about the big book and sober and meetings. And I was just like, whatever. And meanwhile, by that point, fall of 1998, 23 years ago, by that time I had failed out of 2 different colleges. I had blown through a trust fund and I had alienated everyone around me. I was completely unemployable. Like I could not even get a job waiting tables. Y'all, the Cracker Barrel fired me. I mean, it was just, it was rough. It was rough days. And I, I was completely dependent upon my mother and father. I was living at home. They lived in Austin at the time. And so I lived with them and, was stealing from them. I did everything I said I would never do, right? We all make these lists, right? And I, one by one, checked everything off that list at one point or another along the way. So fast forward to fall of 98, best friend is in treatment in Georgetown, Texas. And I am, she asked me if I would come to the family group meeting. And it was I said, okay. And of course I go there and I hadn't slept and I was still a smoker then. I was a heavy smoker. So I smelled like an ashtray and it was January. So it was very cold. And so I looked like shit and I smelled like shit. And, it was just climbing on a wall. And my best friend's mother was there and she knew something wasn't right. Everyone who was there in that meeting knew something wasn't right, right? I was very transparent that I was not okay somehow or another. And my best friend's mother had been on a bowling league with a woman who had 5 years sobriety in a 12-step program. And she called that woman and she said, I think Brandon might be ready. Can I give him your number? And I got that woman's number. And so, and I called that woman, the next day. And I said, I think I have a problem. Can you help? And see, here's the deal. There are many pathways into recovery. How I got into recovery is through a 12-step call. That woman did not trust me enough to give me her address, but she said, why don't we meet in the parking lot of this store and I'll take you to a meeting. And from the part, the moment I got into her car until we got to that meeting, she shared a message of depth and weight with me that I had not heard. And for once I had hope, right? And I was 20 years old and my life was just beginning to change in front of me. And I had no clue what was in store, and I just did whatever those people and those meetings told me to do. If they said jump, I asked how high. They told me to get a sponsor, go to 90 meetings in 90 days, be of service, work the steps, all the things, right? And in the end, they said, and don't use no matter what, right? Now, fast forward a few years later, and I'm in college. My father is on the parole board for the state of Texas. And yeah, I see that constant. And when he first got on the parole board, he was making a special condition for any offender released from the TDCJ institutional division on drug charges or any history of drug and alcohol abuse, that they needed to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And there were parole officers all over Texas getting pissed. And the chairwoman of the board called my father and said, Mr. Poland, what's going on here? What is this 90 meetings in 90 days thing? And he said, look, my kid's a drug addict. He did that and he's got 5 years, So the things that I was told to do, I did. And my own father saw that. He saw that work, right? And he didn't know what the details were, and and they didn't ask. They don't go to meetings. They don't go to Al-Anon or anything, but they saw that something worked, and he thought, if it works for my kid, it'll work for anyone else, right? Because they really thought I was a hopeless case. So yeah, that's what happens, right? And that is what happened and what continues to happen. And like Ahuva, I work in this industry. I work in the treatment industry, and hearing about former clients who have died, and people who work in our industry who have died. I was resistant to work in the treatment industry for many years because I had this old idea that the sickest people in recovery are the ones who work in the industry, right? And the truth is we can get sick anywhere. We can get sick doing anything, And so anytime a friend of mine has expressed interest in coming in to work in this industry, which it's very appealing to do, I have said you need to step it up when it comes to meetings. You need to get into therapy. You need to make sure you are in the middle and stay in the middle, because if you don't, you're going to die. Because that's what we do, you know, because you get enough pride and ego in front of that job title, you know. So I don't know, I've been to a lot of funerals in the last few years for people that were colleagues, and it's just, you know, it's heartbreaking. And what it tells me I need to keep doing is keep doing this work. So thank you.
Thank you. Sheldon, tell us a little bit about what motivated you personally to make that change.
Okay, if it's okay, I'm going to take a very quick minute and talk more about some of the different ways people find their way into recovery. One of the way I think most people like me, and what I'm hearing here from the panelists, is that we seek out recovery because of our own circumstances. But I want to put in a plug for raising the bottom to hit the drug addict and alcoholic. Wives who evict their husbands, usually it's a help for them to wake up to understand there's a problem. Parents who cut their children off financially, it's usually helpful for them, for the child to understand that they have a problem they need to face. They can't continue to ignore. Employers who fire employees do a great deal of service to help people who are drug addicts actively see their help. And the last thing is there are professional organizations that help arrange something called interventions, where you sit down with a drug addict and alcoholic with a lot of important people in his or her life to confront them with consequences. My story is like your guy's story. One of the definitions of alcoholism I like, and of course there are very many, is continued use of beverage alcohol despite major negative life consequences. And I had a lot of major negative life consequences that went on year after year after year. Hospitals, emergency rooms, jails, divorces. I think I was at 4 undergraduate universities before I was able to get an undergraduate degree, all due to drugs and alcohol. I ended up in a master's program, as you said, when you introduced me, I have a master's degree in psychiatric social work from Michigan State University. And it's a couple of year program. And one of the things they make you do is take a job in the field for at least one semester. And through circumstances not of my choosing, I ended up working on an alcoholism treatment unit. Of course, at that point, I was still actively drinking every night and using drugs. And what ended up happening was truly I came to a point in my life where that list of consequences, one after the other with some continuous effect, caught up to me. And I became quite suicidal. And I was one of those suicidal people who you wouldn't know, because like many people who are very suicidal, I'm not telling you, I'm not showing you, I'm keeping it all very locked away in a very dark place. And, but there was a moment of clarity that I attribute to God as I understand him, that I went to somebody who I worked with at the alcoholism treatment unit who had publicly stated that they were in recovery and asked for help. So it was a gift of desperation. I was desperate. And the way I like to say it is I stopped off at a 12-step meeting and asked for help on my way to the bridge above. And that really and truly is what happened to me. That's not hyperbole, that really is. I think that's as much as I want to say about that right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Emma, before we leave this, I really want to underscore something that Sheldon just said, because it is so important in that little piece that he was saying at the beginning before he was telling about his personal story about letting there be consequences for the addict or the alcoholic. We, in the industry, we call it loving someone to death, and I'll get a call from a parent usually of an adult child, right? And they'll say, my child is an addict. I was like, great, stop paying for their cell phone. I can't do that because then they can't call me. I said, but that's the phone they call their drug dealer on. Take away the car that you're paying for, because they're going to drive it into a tree if they don't drive it into another car, right? And most parents don't want to do that. And so really what we have to ask ourselves is, are you taking whatever action for yourself and your own comfort, or to assist the person that you love? And I think that's a very important point, because all of us have said, in different ways, without the consequences, we would not have gotten sober. I was dying. Sheldon talked about being suicidal. I mean, we need those consequences. Now, we also want to raise the bottom, as Sheldon said. We want to say, hey, you don't have to lose all your relationships, your health, your money, your jobs, before you get sober. If you can notice that you have a problem and want it sooner with those smaller consequences, that's a great way to do it. But otherwise, please let people have the consequences, like getting fired from the Cracker Barrel. We need those. Thanks for letting me share that.
Thank you, Howitt. That's actually the segue I think I was gonna also walk across. I think all of you touched on how loved ones in your life influenced you. And I think it's also important to highlight what kind of support is actually helpful versus, as both of Howitt and Sheldon highlighted, the sort of enabling that can get in the way of someone's recovery journey. So I would love to hear, what role did your loved ones, your friends, your family, how did they play a role in your recovery in a way that supported the overall recovery effort that you were making? Who would like to jump in on that question?
I'll jump in. I didn't get much support from my family. Really, once again, you're doing something that's outside the norm for what our family dynamics call for. You're presenting yourself in a way that if other people found out about it would reflect negatively on our family. Jewish people don't go to recovery. But there were some exceptions. One was my elderly grandmother, who invariably gave me a lot of unconditional regard and a lot of unconditional support. I don't think she understood anything about recovery or addiction. She was born and raised in Russia and didn't speak much English, but she always gave me that. And then there was my brother's wife's mother. I don't know what you call that. There's not a name for that relation in English. There is in other languages. But she also was really invariably, even when I showed up pretty drunk, would say nice things and act kindly to me. No, most of the support came directly from within people in the 12-step community. That was the support I got. I guess the only other thing I'll say is that I did get a lot of support from my family much later on, after 10 years, 12 years. As is, I think, quite typical, they finally believed I wasn't going to create problems anymore, and that I was really going to stop drinking. Right? That takes a very long time to occur, in my opinion. Not only my personal experience, but my professional experience does that. But they like the fact that I'm no longer calling them to get me out of jail in the middle of the night, or pick me up from the emergency room at 5 o'clock in the morning, or something like that. So that's gotten a lot better. And of course, at this point in my life, I have a large family of my own who never seen the influence of alcohol and drugs, but they are very aware about my involvement in recovery, mostly because on both sides of the family, there's history of addiction. And I've got grandchildren and children in their 20s through their 50s who I sit down and talk to about that and say, you cannot use drugs and alcohol with impunity. Socially, okay, but you need to be very careful. You can't go on a bender like your friends can in college and have no consequences. You're flirting with danger. So that's what I got to say about that.
Thank you, Sheldon. Brandon, did you also have something to share about friends and family and the way they can support?
Well, you know, for me, and again, like a Howitt, I was very young when I got sober, and I lived with my parents, and when I got sober, I don't live with them now. I lived with them when I got sober, and they were very supportive but cautious and very hands off. And it was one of those things of I remember specifically one night my dad saying, "You're going to meetings, and I'm glad that that's working out for you, but you're still never home," right? Because like I hadn't been home for years, and my dad's like, "But you're still never home," you know. And it was one of those things that I created a lot of damage in my home, within my family, with my mother and father and my little brother, and that took years and years to clean up. You know, the road, the reconstruction can take a long time, and it did. And you know, with my parents, and specifically like them trusting me, right, with their finances. You know, my mother had some catastrophic health issues a couple of years ago, and my father asked me, he said, "You know, your mom is the one who pays all the bills online. I don't know how to do that. Can you show me how to do that? Can you get into my bank account, our bank account, and show me how to pay the bills if your mom doesn't make it?" You know, and it's just like, oh man, he trusts me enough to like look at his money. You know, that took years for that to happen. And then a lot of direct amends and financial amends that I had to make to my parents, you know, and you know, an amend is a changed behavior. So that was that. When it comes to friends, you know, but when I got sober, all my friends were in a dope house. And what I was told from the people and the meetings is that you need to find new playthings, new playgrounds, and new play friends, you know, because the ones you got, they're not going to work. And they were absolutely correct, you know, and I regret nothing. I was in that house with them one day, and the next day I was gone, and they never saw me again. I'm really okay with it, you know. And through the years in social media, you know, like people will track you down if you have your name on Facebook or something, and I don't accept friend requests from those people, you know. It's a very clear line for me, even today, 20 plus years later, that those are not people I need to be around. So my, you know, when it comes to friends, I had to make all new friends, right? I had to find my tribe, you know, and you know, it's, you know, we're in the month of Elul right now, and you know, part of my meditative practice this past month has been looking at Psalm 27, right, and meditating on bits and pieces of that every morning, and doing some writing on that. And it's like a few days ago, I wrote about how, you know, not once, but twice in my life, I have felt like I have found my tribe. I have found my people. You know, there was this group in the 90s called Blind Melon. They were like a one-hit wonder, and they had that song that ran with a little bumblebee, and she happened upon a field of bumblebees. And y'all, those of you in recovery, you know what I mean. Like when we happened upon our field of bumblebees, like what that did to our spirit, what that did to my spirit, it like, I can't, you know, yeah. So not once, but twice, I have found my tribe and in this lifetime, and what joy that gives me. So yeah.
Beautiful.
I'd love to jump in here and answer this question too, Emma. And I think in the question is sort of an implicit idea that our families are going to be there for us. And for the most part, they're not. Either, they just don't have the skills or the interest to be there, or we have just been such a tornado and ripped the family apart so much, like Brandon was talking about, they don't trust us. And they don't want us to be there until they know that recovery is solid. And, I've in my work, I've noticed three things. There are three things that happen. One is that the addict, gets sober and comes back to the same family system. But if the family doesn't change, then the person in recovery really has no choice but to go back to their old role, and they relapse, right? So that they fit into that old family system. The addict gets sober and the family also does its own work. Now we have new roles. And so that person can come into the family and have a new role. And I think Brandon's talking about that, with, his father saying, hey, I don't know what they do over there at that 12-step thing, but they said go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I thought my kid was a goner. We're going to do that. Right. That's that. Okay. We're going to bring it back in. And then the other thing that is probably the most common, if the person stays sober, is the family doesn't change and we create something new. And that was very much my experience. Now, I, like Sheldon, had a grandmother who didn't get it. She was like, I don't know what this thing is. And she said the same thing to me that Brandon's family said. I was living with my grandparents when I got sober, and she said, you don't come to dinner on Saturday night anymore, and that's not okay. Because she'd rather have me at dinner drunk, honestly, than not have me at dinner at all. But I was going to a 12-step meeting, and so I had to change that around and not go to the meetings on Saturday nights anymore, so that I could be with my family. Yeah, and so there's plenty of hours in the day. It didn't have to be those hours to go to a meeting. And so I think it's really important that we not have expectations of others and pin our recovery on what others do. I can get sober and stay sober whether my mom approves or my grandma approves, or they support me financially or they don't, or if I've harmed them, or it doesn't make any difference. My recovery is between me and my higher power. That's it. And there is nothing that, if that channel is open, that I need from a specific person. We all need support, and recovery comes from connection. Now in the business, it's not the opposite of addiction is sobriety. The opposite is connection, right? That addiction is really isolation, is disconnection. And so wherever we can find that, and that's one of the things I love about recovery groups, whatever they are, is that I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Y'all are going to show up for me. You're going to show up for me, whether you like me or not. That's what the definition for me of family is. Oh, the people who show up when, and that I have that reciprocal relationship with too. So, I think it's really important to say that I get to recover no matter what anyone else thinks or does.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that answer and the explanation as well. I think that's really helpful. And Kristin, I would love to hear your experience with getting support and how that helped you in your success.
Yeah, first of all, amen, Ahuva. Like, I am option 3. I have changed. No one else has in my family. I think the only thing that, everyone brought a lot to the table with this. And as far as support, I do think it's necessary through through groups, certainly, but to echo Ahuva's point, realizing too that, or just finding the balance between knowing that recovery is my responsibility, it's an inside job. But with that being said, I can't do it alone. It's that really delicate balance, because so much of my addictive behavior is alone, and that's where I feel most comfortable and uncomfortable, and it's this weird dynamic. But I'm the only one who is going to get me to recovery too. And as hard as it is sometimes to drag myself to a meeting or to make certain decisions that are in my own best interest, those are things that I don't regret. With that being said, I do personally have a relationship with my family, and that has been really interesting, because I am in a lot of ways breaking the mold in seeking recovery and talking about it openly. And to be perfectly honest, I think that that's conflicting and confronting for a lot of people in my family. I certainly don't expect anyone in my family to be like, oh, me too, or anything like that. But I do think, or I've noticed rather, that sometimes when, or most of the time when I bring up like, oh, I was at a meeting, sorry I missed your call, or whatever the case might be, you know, it shuts down a lot of conversations, and I've had to really learn to be okay with that. But it doesn't mean that I stop talking about it. You know what I mean? I want to be respectful for where they are at in their own journey, to sound really cliche. But at the same time, I also want to be open, because what's inevitably happened is with certain family members, there's no follow-up question, there's no elaboration. But then I'll get a call from my weird aunt who I haven't heard from in forever, who's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for bringing this up. Like, this is something that's been going on for years, da, 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 da. And so I start to get information from periphery and from people who are like, oh my gosh, this is the person that I can go to and mention something similar has happened to me, or this, you know, whatever. So look, for example, like my mother, I've had to set some boundaries because although she is supportive, there's a lot of behaviors that I can't be around with her. And so when she comes to visit me in my home, hey, can you not bring XYZ? Or, you know, and setting up some really strict boundaries that I know make her uncomfortable, but it's in my best interest, and I need this to happen for you to come visit. So that's really challenging, to be perfectly honest, but you know, it has to happen. So I guess I'm just kind of bringing that up because it's very complicated with family, but I do completely agree that finding a chosen family within recovery in some way, shape, or form is also very necessary for one's self-care and to support your own journey that you can't always get from other people, and you won't always get from other people. But one thing I know for myself is that recovery is not a straight line. Wish it was. I am someone who loves a list. But this is not that. It can be very messy, and you know, our openness can be very challenging for some people, and it's very challenging to be open in itself. But as far as support, the nice thing about at least a lot of 12-step meetings is the fact that it's anonymous. Like, no one knows your shit. A lot of people don't know, you know, your family history. And so it can be very refreshing to be in a room full of people who know exactly who you are without knowing who you are, you know? And that's a great place to start to build healthy relationships if you don't necessarily have that or if you're walking away from a situation where you're only rooted in commonality with people that are just utilizing the same broken shit you are, you know? So yeah, it's messy, man. But even just talking openly about it here on this panel, it's like, oof, we know some things. Okay, I'm writing down that book. Like, thank you so much. Like, you know, so you can start at least with those groups, and typically those can kind of lead you to other places where you can find camaraderie in sobriety, whatever that looks like for you.
Thank you so much. Well, we have a couple of minutes left. I haven't seen any questions come in the chat, so I think I'm going to throw out one last one. You know, something that has been a big theme that I've heard from all of you tonight, or two themes I would say, is breaking the cycles that either were part of your family cycle or part of your own pattern, and coming out of that, but also you know, reducing stigma. That, you know, you have all been so candid, and I think that that is an incredible pathway for a lot of other people. So I would love to hear what you think could help the Jews in our community with, you know, busting through that stigma to get the help that we know, you know, people are out there and people need it. Sheldon, you look like you're ready.
Yeah, I think that what has to happen is we have to change the culture. You know, people like the people on this panel need to be invited to speak from the pulpit at services on Friday night and Saturday morning. People like the people on this panel need to be invited to go to Hadassah groups and speak. People like the people on this panel need to go to men's groups. We need to have one-on-ones with rabbis. It's a cultural issue for us, given that what we're talking about is not just addiction and recovery, but Jews in addiction and recovery. And so we have to begin to change the culture. And that's very, very hard. That's a lot. That's a 100-year journey, I think, but you got to start somewhere. So Emma, I challenge you. You're Jewish Family and Children's Services in Austin. Shalom Austin is the place where could go point on this and set that up and make it happen.
I'll take you up on that challenge. Thank you, Sheldon. Brandon, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Sheldon said, you know, I have a responsibility to be vocal and to be completely myself in my community, right? So when I lived in Austin, every rabbi in Austin, not only at Temple Beth Shalom, but Congregation Beth Israel, Agudas Achim, and even at Tiferet, and even the Chabad rabbis, they knew that I was in recovery, and that if anyone, any family reached out to them or a congregant reached out to them, that those rabbis could give my name and number to anyone who reached out needing help. And I live in Dallas. I'm a member of Temple Emmanuel, which is, you know, the largest synagogue here, and I've let the clergy at Temple Emmanuel know, you know, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is my experience, and feel free to give my name and number to anyone you need to, right? And you know, part of that is, you know, thinking about looking at Jewish spaces, right? So I was asked to speak at a Pride Shabbat earlier this summer, you know, at Temple Emmanuel. And one of the things I said is, you know what, have some gay and queer and trans speakers on the Bima, not only in June, you know, and like extending that to, you know what, let's have like a sober Shabbat. What would that look like, you know? What would it look like if every congregation in Austin had a sobriety Shabbat, you know, and had from JFS or a congregant who's willing to be open about being in recovery, come and speak from the Bima, you know, what would that look like? That would be an impactful experience for the congregation, and right now we're in a time that us all gathering together would not be the smartest thing, but this is temporary. We'll all be able to gather again one day, I know, and have sobriety Shabbats. And there's one treatment center in Los Angeles. It's called Beit Shuvah. It's a Jewish treatment center, and it's absolutely wonderful. And there's one. And unless you're a Jew, you really don't know about it. Or unless you work in the industry, you really don't know about it. Jews in the industry, we all know of this treatment center, but not everyone else does, right? So it's this thing of being more vocal about yes, Jews can become alcoholics and addicts, and this is a part of our community, and we need to shed light on it. So yeah.
Thank you. Kristin or Huva, would you like to jump in?
Thank you. I totally agree with Brandon as far as we need more options, and we need to be inclusive with our options as far as sober Shabbat, but also looking at, some of the things we do in a slightly different way, which I think thankfully, a lot of congregations are in a lot of different ways. But, when it comes to, fasting on Yom Kippur, like how can we support people that might be experiencing eating disorders? How can they still be participating? Or even like just people with other issues, like, pregnant people and stuff like that. And then with some of our, like with Purim, like let's not, create a culture that, might go a little cray cray after, or that type of thing. So I definitely think options, but I think I certainly don't work in the industry, but I am adjacent to it with leading yoga for 12-step recovery. And I think having options like that available and realizing that it might be a really slow start, as far as like offering maybe 12-step groups at our community centers and at our synagogues, and really giving them a good long time to start having people trickle in, because sometimes those meetings take 6 months, take a year of just showing up, sometimes all on your lonesome, for people to see it on the schedule, to see it, see the little sign pointing to where it is. It sometimes takes a long time for those to take hold. And it can be a little lonely to be sitting there by yourself waiting for someone to show up. But I think it needs to start just being something like, oh, that's where the 12-step group is. That's where the 12-step group is. And, it might take a little while for people to get comfortable with seeing it in our spaces and then actually being willing to show up and participate. But, I think that's potentially a good place to start, is just starting to have it normalized of seeing those groups and having these types of conversations. Certainly, in the month that has a national awareness, but also all the time, and offering lots of options for people is a good place to start, maybe. So.
Thank you so much, Kristin.
So yeah, I loved what Sheldon said about culture, and we need allies in the rabbinate, right? We need our rabbis to be allies with us, because as Kristin was saying, Purim is ridiculous. And if you look at what's the tradition, where is the tradition that the bar is brought into the reading of what? Yeah, there is a tradition that people drink, and there is but it's about merriment and cross-dressing and a lot of other things. That's a new minhag. to be absolutely slaughtered drunk in the middle of the service. These are things that we have created for ourselves. And so we need our rabbis to be our allies. You know, and you see this more, the more conservative you go, right? You see more of this, you know, in Reform. There's a Reform congregation near me where I am in Washington State. And, you know, I said to the rabbi, you know, I don't want to have a fight, but is there any way that the Haroset could not all have wine in it? And he said, oh, actually, thank you for bringing that up. And now the Haroset only has grape juice. And there is a bottle of grape juice on every single table, because it isn't just the alcoholic, as Kristin was saying, it isn't just the alcoholic, right? And our tradition is so strong that you put your health first. I passed out at the Western Wall at Tisha B'Av because it was so unbelievably hot. And when I came to, there's a crowd of women around me and they're like, sweetheart, you have to drink water. It's not okay to fast because you have to fast. That's not what our tradition is about. We put the health and welfare. Why would you use a phone on Shabbat if you were Orthodox? To save a life. So our tradition already has this in there, and we just need to connect to it. The other thing that I'm so passionate about is I will not be embarrassed about things that I have done. So, you know, I've done some stupid things when I was drinking, and I refuse to be embarrassed. Listen, I did that in my 20s. If you didn't do anything embarrassing in your 20s, right, then you can talk to me about the embarrassing things that I did. And I happened to be drunk when I did them. You know, I will not be embarrassed any more than someone who, you know, I personally didn't go, rehab wasn't quite the thing it is now. I didn't go to rehab when I was, you know, getting sober, but who cares? It's no different than going to the hospital and getting your appendix out. You get the treatment that you need. I am so blessed that in the last few years, there has been trauma treatment that made a difference for me, changed my life. I am so blessed that I found this group of musicians that I work with now, and what music does and how that has helped me to recover. It's made my addiction recovery blossom. And so if someone says, you know, and actually my brother did this once at a party, I don't know, I was sober, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. And he was trying to hit on a woman, and he started to say like what a bad sister I was, which I wasn't a good sister. He was telling a true story, but she was like, you know what? I don't want to hear it because she seems to be really cool now. And I hold on to that. I will not be embarrassed, and I will use my story. Whether you all want to hear it or not, I will use my story to help people who cannot speak up for themselves. Those addicts and the mentally ill and the traumatized and the people who don't have a voice for whatever reason. If I can use my story as a teaching tool, I will.
Thank you so much. Well, all of you have shared such powerful experiences and testimony, and your connection to your Judaism is clearly a strong foundation for each of you in these different ways as part of your recovery and as part of your life. And I'm just so grateful that each of you can be here to share your story. And to inspire those that get the honor and the privilege of hearing it. So thank you so much, each and every one of you, for being here tonight. And I just appreciate all of you so much. I hope all of you are well and you have a beautiful new year coming up. Thank you.
Shana Tova.
Yeah, Shana Tova Lechem.
Shana Tova. Thank you so much. Laila Tov.